Hi, I'm Gregory Paolini, and on today's episode of Table Saw Techniques, I'm going to introduce you into the world of pattern cutting on your SawStop table saw. So stick around. When most people are cutting on their table saw, they're thinking about cuts that are parallel and straight. How in the heck would you cut something that looks like this? Well, the answer is with pattern cutting. And it's really easy to do on your SawStop. So let me show you what's involved. The key to pattern cutting are two things. First of all, a pattern. And this one I've already made. I've got good square edges on it. And the story behind this pattern is I've got a small bookcase that needs to fit in a house that sets into an obtuse angle. So I'm going to need several of these pieces to act as the floor, the ceiling, and shelves of my cabinet. The second element of pattern cutting is a fence. And this one is just simply a piece of plywood screwed perpendicularly to another piece of plywood. I've got some holes cut in it so I can clamp this whole unit to the fence. Okay, so this is going to be a paint grade cabinet, so I don't have to worry about marring this surface up. I can just go ahead and patch that afterwards. So to hold my pattern in place, I'm going to screw the pattern to the workpiece. Now, if this were not a paint grade piece and I wouldn't be able to fill these holes, then I would use double-sided tape. All right, now I'll head back to the table saw. Alright, so I'm going to need to put my fence in place and simply just line it up and clamp it on. And the next thing I want to do is I want to align the edge of my fence to my blade. I'm going to set the square right against there and slide the fence over until it just touches. That's perfect. And my blade height is higher than my workpiece, but lower, just slightly lower than my fence. Now it's important for me to note the amount of cutoff that we have, the amount of waste. If you start cutting a lot of material off when you're pattern cutting with the table saw, you could end up causing the waste to bind in between the fence and the blade, and that's going to give you a dangerous kickback situation. So you really want to cut off minimal amounts. So for this particular pattern, I think it's narrow enough that we don't have a safety issue. I'll just stop the saw in between each cut and remove the waste. But if it were any bigger than this, I'd want to actually trim that waste off first with a jigsaw or a bandsaw. And now I'm just going to put on some safety gear, my safety glasses, and my hearing protection. And then we're ready to cut. I maintain good, firm downward pressure and firm pressure towards the fence. I don't need to force this through the fence, but I do need to keep enough pressure on the workpiece that it stays tight up against that fence. I make a full pass, completely past the blade, just like any other cut. Now I'm going to let the saw wind down. I want to make sure that the saw comes to a dead stop before I reach in there and remove the waste. One more pass on this workpiece will yield the shape I need for my corner cabinet. And again, focus on the blade until it comes to a dead stop before reaching in and removing the workpiece cut off. There we go. Perfect copy. On to the next one. And back to the table saw.
I'll repeat this procedure as many times as necessary to yield the quantity of parts I need to complete my cabinet, stopping the saw and removing the waste each and every time for safety.
And now I have the three components that'll make up the floor, the shelf, and the ceiling of my cabinet. They're all exactly the same and all super simple to make thanks to pattern cutting on the SawStop table saw. Join me again for another episode of Table Saw Techniques.